Have you ever wondered how a single ship, a few angry letters, and distant trade complaints could change the fate of an entire kingdom? The story of the Second Anglo-Burmese War isn't just about battles, it's about ambition, resistance, and the quiet moments that lead to loud consequences. Let's take a gentle step back in time and uncover how a war that lasted just 1 year reshaped the heart of Burma forever. Today, I want to take a little journey with you back in time. Not just to learn about battles or old maps, but to understand the hearts of people and the choices they made. Let's talk about a time called the Second Anglo-Burmese War, which happened between 1852 and 1853. It began with a disagreement. British merchants, who were working far from home in the Burmese port city of Rangoon, felt they weren't being treated fairly. They complained to their government, and their concerns soon became louder than words. Boats were sent, soldiers arrived, and just like that, a quiet tension turned into a war. The British were powerful. They had ships and cannons that echoed along the coast. In just months, cities like Martaban, Rangoon, and Pegu were taken. The Burmese, led by their king, tried to hold their ground, but they were facing a force too strong, too fast. Sometimes, wars don't end with peace talks or handshakes. This one didn't. There was no treaty, just a silent decision. The British stayed. They took over a large part of Burma's land, places filled with homes, markets, temples, and stories. The Burmese king, Pagan Min, lost his crown. A new king, Mindon, tried to guide his people through the storm that followed. And though the war was short, it left deep footprints, ones that would lead to even more changes in the years ahead. History can feel distant, but when we listen closely, it becomes something becomes human. People lived through these moments, just like we're living ours today. And by remembering their story, we learn how important it is to choose kindness, fairness, and understanding of an. When the world feels complicated, the Second Anglo-Burmese War had its roots in growing tensions between British merchants and the Burmese government, particularly in the port city of Rangoon. After the First Anglo-Burmese War, relations between the two sides remained strained. Over time, British commercial interests in Burma increased, especially in Lower Burma, where trade through Rangoon became significant. British merchants operating there frequently reported mistreatment by Burmese authorities, claiming they were subjected to harassment, unfair taxes, and disrespect toward British consular representatives. These grievances created diplomatic friction, and the British saw this as an opportunity to exert more influence over Burmese territory. The British East India Company, which was already administering large parts of India, considered the Burmese kingdom both a threat to regional trade routes and a potential area for further expansion. At the same time, there was a growing belief among British officials that the Burmese monarchy could not be trusted to uphold agreements like the Treaty of Yandabu, which had ended the First Anglo-Burmese War. This treaty had set terms for peace and allowed certain trade rights, but its interpretation and enforcement became a point of contention. The British viewed the Burmese failure to respect merchant rights and diplomatic protocol as a breach of that earlier agreement. Tensions escalated when Commodore George Lambert was sent to Burma to negotiate and protect British interests. His mission, initially diplomatic, quickly turned confrontational. A minor incident was used to justify the use of force. Lambert seized a Burmese ship and blockaded Rangoon, turning a political disagreement into a military conflict. The British government, already prepared to act, supported this move and used it as a pretext to launch a full-scale invasion. Thus, economic motives, political mistrust, and imperial ambition all came together to ignite the war. The immediate trigger for the Second Anglo-Burmese War was the British response to what they saw as mistreatment of their merchants and diplomatic agents in Rangoon. In late 1851, the British government decided to take a more aggressive stance and dispatched a naval officer, Commodore George Lambert, to Burma with instructions to demand redress from the Burmese authorities. His official mission was to resolve the complaints of British merchants and ensure that the Burmese respected the rights outlined in previous agreements. However, Lambert took a confrontational approach upon arriving in Rangoon. He presented an ultimatum demanding an apology, the removal of a local governor, and compensation. The Burmese court, under King Pagan Min, attempted to negotiate and sent envoys to meet the British, but Lambert was not satisfied with their offers. Tensions quickly escalated when Lambert ordered the seizure of a Burmese royal ship, an act that was seen as highly provocative. Following that, he imposed a naval blockade of Rangoon, essentially starting hostilities without a formal declaration of war. The British used this incident as justification to begin military operations. British forces were soon mobilized and began attacking Burmese forts and strategic locations in Lower Burma. Although the initial British mission was diplomatic in appearance, it became clear that there was an underlying desire to expand influence and territory. The seizure of the Burmese ship was the spark that set off the war, but it was only the final act in a series of calculated moves. The British government later endorsed Lambert's aggressive actions, framing them as necessary for protecting British interests and maintaining national honor. What began as a dispute over merchant grievances became the beginning of a war that would reshape the political landscape of Burma and extend British colonial control. The British military campaign during the Second Anglo-Burmese War began swiftly. After the initial provocations in Rangoon, with naval superiority and well-trained troops, British forces quickly launched attacks on key strategic points along the Burmese coast. The first major assault came in April 1852, when British troops attacked and captured the town of Matabon, located on the eastern bank of the Salween River. This served as a gateway into Lower Burma, and was quickly followed by a larger operation against Rangoon, one of the most important ports in the region. The British Navy bombarded Rangoon from the river while ground troops landed and engaged Burmese forces defending the city. Despite resistance, the British overpowered the defenders with superior artillery and disciplined infantry maneuvers. Within days, Rangoon was under British control, and it was soon fortified and occupied as a central base of operations. The fall of Rangoon had both strategic and symbolic significance, demonstrating the power of British military force and destabilizing Burmese morale. Following Rangoon, the British advanced toward Pegu, another important city in Lower Burma. The capture of Pegu involved fierce fighting, but once again, British firepower and naval mobility proved decisive. The British used steam-powered gunboats to navigate rivers and move troops swiftly between targets, giving them a major advantage over Burmese forces, who relied mostly on traditional weapons and fortifications. The speed and effectiveness of these operations shocked the Burmese court, which struggled to mount a coordinated defense. Although local resistance continued in some areas, the main cities fell in rapid succession. British troops faced tropical diseases and difficult terrain, but they pushed forward with confidence, supported by reinforcements from India. These quick victories laid the foundation for British dominance in Lower Burma and revealed how unbalanced the conflict had become in terms of military capability. The Burmese response to the British invasion during the Second Anglo-Burmese War was marked by determined but ultimately ineffective resistance. King Pagan Min, who ruled Burma at the time, faced serious challenges in mounting a strong defense against the better-equipped and better-organized British forces. The Burmese military was largely traditional, relying on infantry armed with muskets, swords, and spears, along with fortified positions that were outdated compared to the British artillery and naval firepower. Although Burmese troops showed bravery in defending cities like Matabon, Rangoon, and Pegu, they were quickly overwhelmed by the British strategy of combined land and naval assaults. The rapid pace of British advances created confusion within the Burmese command, and communication between different regional commanders was slow and often unreliable. Internally, the war caused political instability within the royal court. King Pagan Min's leadership was criticized for being indecisive and ineffective during the crisis. His inability to repel the British and protect important cities led to widespread dissatisfaction among Burmese nobles and generals. This unrest eventually culminated in a palace coup. In early 1853, Pagan Min was deposed by his half-brother, Prince Minden, who ascended the throne and became king, Minden Min. Minden was seen as a more capable and pragmatic leader who immediately sought to stabilize the situation. He recognized the military superiority of the British and began efforts to reform the army and modernize the administration. Although he did not immediately seek a direct peace settlement, while local militias and some remnants of the Royal Army continued to resist British occupation in the countryside, their efforts were fragmented and lacked central coordination. The change in leadership marked a shift in Burmese strategy from direct confrontation to cautious diplomacy and internal strengthening. As the kingdom attempted to preserve its independence in the face of growing British control in Lower Burma, by early 1853, the British had secured firm control over Lower Burma, including key territories such as Rangoon, Martaban, and Pegu. These regions were of immense economic and strategic importance due to their access to trade routes, fertile land, and proximity to the sea. Unlike the First Anglo-Burmese War, the Second Anglo-Burmese War did not conclude with a formal peace treaty. Instead, the British unilaterally declared the annexation of Lower Burma. They established administrative control without negotiations or any official recognition from the Burmese monarchy. This action reflected the British Empire's growing confidence in its ability to expand territory without diplomatic agreement, relying instead on military success to enforce new borders. In response to the British occupation, the newly crowned King Minden Min chose not to engage in a full-scale war against the British. Instead, he focused on consolidating power in the northern part of Burma and maintaining the sovereignty of Upper Burma. Although sporadic resistance continued in some regions, there was no organized Burmese military campaign to retake the lost territories. British administrators began integrating Lower Burma into the British Indian Empire, developing Rangoon into a major colonial port city and expanding their economic interests in the region. The absence of a treaty meant that there were no clearly defined terms or agreements regarding the annexation, leading to lingering tensions between the two powers. The British decision not to pursue further invasion into Upper Burma at that time was partly influenced by logistical concerns and the desire to avoid overextension. However, the annexation of Lower Burma significantly weakened the Burmese kingdom, isolating it from vital trade and resources. This loss disrupted the balance of power and laid the foundation for further British expansion, which would culminate in the complete annexation of Burma during the Third Anglo-Burmese War in 1885. The long-term impact of the Second Anglo-Burmese War was significant for both Burma and the British Empire. For Burma, the war marked a turning point in its sovereignty and territorial integrity. The loss of Lower Burma meant that the kingdom was cut off from the sea, which deeply affected its economy, trade, and political influence. Rangoon, once a vibrant Burmese port, became the administrative and commercial center for British rule in the region. The annexation of this vital area not only weakened the Burmese monarchy, but also diminished its ability to interact with neighboring kingdoms and foreign powers on equal footing. Internally, the monarchy shifted its focus toward survival and reform. King Minden Min, recognizing the growing threat from colonial powers, initiated several modernization efforts. He restructured the administrative system, tried to modernize the army, introduced new tax reforms, and sought diplomatic relations with Western countries in hopes of preserving the independence of Upper Burma. For the British Empire, the successful annexation of Lower Burma enhanced its strategic and economic standing in Southeast Asia. It gained access to valuable resources like teak and rice, expanded its influence along key trade routes, and secured a critical position between India and China. The war also showcased the power and reach of the British military, reinforcing the idea that the empire could intervene quickly and decisively in regional conflicts. The lack of a formal treaty allowed Britain to act unilaterally in shaping Burma's future without acknowledging Burmese sovereignty over the annexed territories. Over time, British control in Lower Burma became more entrenched, with increased migration, infrastructure development, and economic exploitation. The groundwork laid during this period directly contributed to the eventual invasion and complete colonization of Burma in 1885, ending centuries of independent Burmese rule and transforming the kingdom into a province of British India. The Second Anglo-Burmese War was more than a brief military campaign. It was a decisive chapter in the long and difficult transformation of Burma under colonial pressure. What began as a dispute over merchant grievances turned into a strategic conquest that reshaped the region's political and economic landscape. The swift British victories, the fall of key cities like Rangoon and Pegu, and the unilateral annexation of Lower Burma exposed the vulnerability of the Burmese monarchy in the face of imperial ambition. King Mindon Min's rise to power marked a period of cautious reform and resistance, but the damage had already been done. Burma had lost vital territory, access to the sea, and a large part of its identity. For the British, the war expanded their empire and deepened their hold over Southeast Asia. For Burma, it marked the beginning of the end of independence, path that would lead to full colonization just 3 decades later. In remembering this history, we recognize not only the battles fought, but also the deeper consequences of power, resistance, and the loss of sovereignty. Asterisk.